Alabama is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen, for being with us today. Before we start talking about sanctions, I wanted to take a moment to talk about the Committee on Foreign Investments in the United States. In 2021, the U.S. Department of Agriculture noted that foreign investors now owned over 40 million acres of our farmland. This has occurred since 2015 at a tune of about 2.2 million acres a year. I've heard from many Alabamians as I've traveled across the state, and this is a concern for them, specifically the Chinese Communist Party and their willingness and their efforts and deliberate and intentional attempts to buy up fertile U.S. farmlands. I believe food security is national security. Food security is economic security. So I believe that 1 acre of our farmland owned by the Chinese Communist Party is 1 acre too many. Additionally, I think there's another layer of national security concerns that we're allowing China to buy up farmland near our military installations. It is completely and totally unacceptable. So my question, Mr. Lowery, for you as a former chair of CFIUS, when it comes to ensuring we have a strong agriculture voice at the table when these decisions are being made, do you agree that it's reasonable that the Secretary of Agriculture should be involved as a member of CFIUS?
I think it is totally reasonable, yes. And as I mentioned earlier, if the CFIUS needed to bring in agriculture right now, they can do it on an ad hoc basis. But to the point that you've made and a number of senators have made, it sounds to me like this probably should be looked at in a more systematic way.
Yes, we need a permanent seat at the table because it is absolutely unacceptable. When you look, I believe, probably say with great confidence that the Chinese Communist Party is not allowing the United States of America to buy up their farmland, particularly near their military installations. So on that line of questioning, under CFIUS, it's almost always national security agreements. They're issued instead of outright blocking foreign companies from acquiring U.S. companies or engaging in transactions that are assessed to have these national security implications. We issue these agreements first. And my question to you is how does CFIUS enforce a national security agreement? And what are the consequences for failing to adhere to the terms of those agreements?
So if you look at most of the numbers about CFIUS reviewed in 2021, which is last year, we have 275 transactions. Of those 275 transactions, about 10% of them, roughly 30 transactions, had what you just described, mitigation agreements. So that means basically that the government had concerns about the transaction, but they thought the transaction could go through, but they wanted to make sure that there are specific measures put in place to protect national security potentially in the future. Those national security agreements can last for a long time. They are implemented and negotiated by specific agencies that have the right type of expertise. So if it's a military type of issue, the Department of Defense will negotiate it. If it's something on information technology issues, most likely the Department of Justice or maybe Homeland Security will do it. They follow these agreements up through monitoring mechanisms, auditing mechanisms from third-party auditors. And if there are violations of the mitigation agreements, they do have the capability to, one, obviously step in and do something, including they could actually divest the transaction way after the fact, or more likely, they could do something like they could do a fine, they could do warnings to basically see, kind of make sure you get your house in order type of problem. So that's kind of how it works. And I think there's roughly about 200 mitigation agreements from past that are in effect. Every now and then, some of them roll off because there may be somebody else who comes in and purchases it who's a domestic buyer. Okay,
so question actually for each of you. During your time in government, were there violations of these mitigation agreements? Just yes or no?
No, but there weren't the same enforcement authorities that were created after I left in 2018.
Okay.
So I can't properly answer.
Okay.
There were violations that we noticed when I was there, just like Kevin said, that some of this has become tougher over time, but they have been violation of the agreements, and usually they were worked out through mechanisms of, they weren't egregious violations is probably the best way. There were violations and there are things that happen that are just mistakes, right? And so the parties usually would work that out with the agency that was in charge, who would report it back to the overall CFIUS committee to make sure that everybody was aware.
Okay.
I don't recall, much like Mr. Lowery just said, I don't recall intentional egregious violations, but I do believe mistakes were made that had to be corrected.
Okay. Thank you all for your time.
Thanks, Senator Britt. Senator Kramer of North Dakota.